All right, Entree Architect community, it's 4 p.m. Eastern, which means it's time for the Entree Architect Context and Clarity live conversation for Thursday, July 21st, 2022. Thanks for joining us today. As you get here, say hi. Let us know that you're here. Let us know where here is for you. Where are you joining this conversation from? It's great to have you here. If we've never met before, my name's Jeff. I'm in Indianapolis. I come here every weekday afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern for one reason, so that we can find clarity around the things that matter most to you, the architect. Doesn't matter if you're the employee of a firm or you own your own firm. Maybe you circle a date on the calendar. You said 2022 is my year and you're on the runway to starting your own thing. Or maybe you have owned your own firm for a year or 10 years or 19 years, and you're starting to rethink or reimagine what that firm could or maybe even should be. All of the topics that we cover, one topic every day, they all fall under the broad umbrella of the business of architecture. And they're all the need-to-know topics for the success of small firm architects just like you. So thanks for joining us today. I am joined, as usual, for Context and Clarity Live by my co-host, Katharine MacPhail. Hi, Katharine. How are you?
Hello, Jeff. I'm okay. I'm a little bit annoyed with Scott mentioning that he needs a sweater, though, I have to say. You see that? It's 58 degrees in San Francisco. Well, good for you, Scott.
Scott has been, what was the Mark Twain quote from yesterday? Scott has been rubbing in the coldest winter. Was the summer in San Francisco, I think.
Mm-hmm.
He has been rubbing that in this week as the rest of the country just melts, I think.
Yeah,
But
I think so. And Kurt doesn't have any air conditioning either. So yeah. So I don't have any. I also don't have hair and makeup here at my home studio. So it's just going to be natural consequences of being really hot here.
yeah, if you're not aware, Katharine moved and our hair and makeup crew went to the wrong address today. So
Yeah, they went to my old house instead of this
yeah,
house.
they'll catch up with her next week. We actually had a power outage yesterday afternoon, and I don't know why exactly, but I shortly after I was in my car and I saw all the people that were standing outside of their houses. I guess because it was getting so hot in the house that standing out in the 95-degree heat was a better alternative. At least there was a breeze. But yeah, stay cool, everybody. Stay safe out there. Let's see. It looks like Christian was on the screen first from Ithaca, New York, which means that he is the winner of today's John Kinney Memorial Crocheted Bathtub Award. That's the award that we hand out for the person first into the room on any given day. So congratulations, Christian. Thanks for joining us again. Glad you're in first. Isra from, all right, this is a test, right? Peabody?
You got it, Jeff. Peabody.
I have been practicing my Massachusetts lingo.
I know. Peabody. You sent me a video about them too, so I know you've been studying.
Such a TikTok about it.
Yeah.
Israel, welcome back from the North Shore of Boston. Chris, also from Massachusetts, says it's tough these days where there are other platforms. I'm not sure what that means. Jessica, welcome back from Los Angeles, California. Rod is in the house. Let's see. Kurt is joining us from Flint, Michigan. He's over on Twitch. He is leading the very large contingent of architects who are on Twitch. So thanks for heading that crew up, Kurt. He says it's crazy hot in Michigan and no AC in your house. Man, hope you can rectify that. And I feel that pain. Jessica says Scott's time is coming. Sea level is rising. Yeah, look out. That's a shot across the bow. Let's see. Rod says there are many YouTube videos on how to make your own air conditioning. John Jones, welcome back from Westport. There's a chance of storms. You probably have those. What do you have? Those afternoon pop-ups probably, be my guess, because I'm pretty sure it's hot in Westport. Let's see. Chris wants to know if I'm planning a trip because I'm practicing the Massachusetts lingo. No, I'm practicing the Massachusetts lingo because there are so many of you in this community from Massachusetts that I've got to say it right.
Right. We don't let you get away with it.
You speak your own language, so yeah.
I appreciate it.
You're intolerant of people that cannot pronounce. You gotta watch that. I sent that same TikTok to you and Chris, so you both know what I'm talking about. You add all those extra letters.
Well, it
into
was
your
really the
words.
English people. It wasn't really us. It was just
Yeah,
our.
but you continue it,
I
right?
know, I know. There was
Maybe
no
there's
imagination, and they just named
well,
everything
maybe there's a
after.
new trend that you could follow.
We'll have to see. We'll have to
Yeah,
ask Bob about that.
foreshadowing there. All right. Well, great to have all of you with us today. Looks like a lot of Facebookers in today. If you are over there on Facebook, if you're joining us from Facebook, you're joining from a private group, either the Entree Architect Community Facebook group or the Architects and Allies group. Both are private groups. Facebook has these rules, these privacy policies, which don't allow your comments to leave Facebook. So to go from Facebook to Restream, which is this platform that we use to broadcast everywhere. So if you're commenting away right now and going, hey, why is my comment not showing up on the screen? You just need to give Facebook permission for your name and your likeness and your comment to escape the Zuckerberg world. So there's a URL in the bottom left of your corner right now. It's chat.restream.io/FB, like Facebook. If you type that into your browser window, your search bar up there, a couple of clicks later, and you will give Facebook permission, and you will suddenly, all of your comments, all of your problems will be solved. We've talked about this before.
That's
This is
true.
the way to solve all of your problems, and your comments will be showing up on the screen, just like Scott Thrifts, where he's responding to Jessica. This is normal. It's been years since we've had normal. Usually everything is on fire by now. Ooh, yeah, that's a crazy reality. Okay, with that, welcome. Why don't we introduce today's guest? We've got a great guest lined up today. We started this conversation this morning at 9 a.m. Eastern over on the Clubhouse app. It was a great conversation this morning. We're going to continue it this afternoon. So, with that, our guest today is a strategist. Maybe he's a futurist. I don't know. We'll have to ask him about that. But he's definitely a trend spotter. He's a designer, an editor, and an observer and a researcher. He's a principal at DesignIntelligence. Bob Fisher, welcome to Context and Clarity Live.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you.
It's great to have you here. It was great to have you in Clubhouse this morning. We had a great conversation, really kind of primed the pump, so to speak, for got some questions answered this morning, but really, I think set the stage for the conversation this afternoon. Christian said it was an excellent conversation this morning in Clubhouse. So there's a good thumbs up right there. Before we
Sorry,
go
go
ahead.
I was just going to say one of the things I really appreciated was hearing what was on everyone's mind during the call. Just learning a little bit about, when folks are out there in practice, small and mid-sized firm practice, what is it that most concerns them these days? What is it that when they're trying to think about the future of their firms, what are they looking at? I appreciated the opportunity to hear that from folks, and hope we'll have some of that today.
Yeah. Well, I was glad that you were there, and that's really the purpose of what we do on Thursday mornings is really collect the questions, collect the ideas that people want to talk about and people want to cover in our excuse me, in our afternoon conversation. Excuse me, caught that frog there, but so it was a good conversation this morning, and we started talking about this idea of kind of looking out and looking around at trends and how to identify trends and what do we do about it. But maybe the place that we ought to start, because I don't know if design intelligence is something that everybody knows about. So maybe if we could just take a minute to set the stage and talk about what design intelligence is and what you do, and then we can roll into probably a demonstration of that.
Sure. Well, design intelligence has been around since 1994, and we have been focused on helping create success for firms in the built environment. And we do that through a variety of different means. We've got an organization called the Design Futures Council, which is for executive leaders of firms in architecture, engineering, and construction. And we've been bringing together those leaders in small groups to talk about issues and topics that are kind of strategic importance to folks in those positions. And then we also have, at the heart of it, we've got a research organization that does research on those those types of topics. And so we're talking about things like education and talent. We're talking about, we were one of the first organizations to bring folks together around sustainability, which we started doing in the late 90s. And, the business of design and other areas like that. We've got a leadership institute for helping prepare the next generation of folks to assume leadership in architecture and engineering and construction firms. And then we've got a strategic advisory, which is where I spend a lot of my time these days, working with individual firms on various challenges that they face. Personally, one of the things I work with firms around three main topics. One is developing a vision of what they want to become in the mid to longer term future. And part of that is really understanding what is going to change in the world that they need to respond to. Vision is a response to the future in a lot of senses. So then once you have that established, then there's backcasting, taking a look at where you are today and seeing that gap and making a plan to cover that gap. And that's essentially what a strategic plan is. And then I also work with firms on pretty much all dimensions of how they take what they do to market. I don't know if you're muted, but I can't hear you.
Sorry, I was muted.
Oh, okay.
Good catch. We could have gotten an hour into this, and then you could have told me. You were talking about looking at things that you need to respond to, and there may be some folks showing up to this is maybe sort of an ironic statement, but some folks may be showing up going, hey, this isn't who we thought the guest was going to be today. We had to make a little bit of a pivot this week, but what we do every week is because we have conversations every single day, we develop topics around a theme, and we always start with a question every day for these conversations. Earlier this week, we asked the question, and I think it was completely relevant to the guest that was originally scheduled. I think it's completely relevant to this conversation as well. And that was, what's going on around us that should influence architecture? We kind of left the door open. That could be architecture as in influence the built environment. It could be architecture in terms of the profession. But as you were describing the three areas that you focus on, the second area really jumped out as aligning with that particular topic.
Mm-hmm. Well, what it is it's a way that it's a way of kind of firms and leaders of firms can comprehensively look at what they do. Each one of us who's in practice, some of us have practices that have quite a number of people working within them. We're leading these organizations through this landscape, and keeping our eyes on the horizon is an important part of making sure we're carving out the right path for ourselves.
Yeah, it seems to me that we'll jump deeper into some questions about trends here in a minute, but I think one of the things, one of the things that you and I talked about earlier this week as we were preparing for today was the difference between larger firms and smaller firms. And a lot of our audience, if not all of our audience today, will be small firm architects. What's the biggest difference?
What's the biggest difference?
Yeah.
Actually, I would say that there aren't as many differences as you might think.
Right.
Obviously, there are differences. I mean, the numbers are very different, numbers of people and, revenue numbers and all that sort of stuff. But the fundamentals of creating value for clients, the fundamentals of pursuing a design vision, the fundamentals of leading a group of people, all of these are, they're the same at the core, but they look a little different based on scale. But
Sure.
there's really a lot that that all sizes of firms share. I would say there's more that they share than they do not.
Yeah, and I was thinking, about the reality for a lot of our audience with small firms, and then thinking ahead to the idea of trends and, um, what do you respond to? What do you not respond to? And the inherent flexibility of a smaller organization may provide a little bit of an advantage, perhaps, I guess.
Mhm. It definitely can. One of the things that we might want to do is we might want to kind of level set on what we mean when we talk about trends.
That's a good
Um,
point.
in the conversation this morning, Katharine, you asked, well, are trends things we should even pay attention to? Well, it depends on what you're talking about. Actually, I would
Right.
say, in a way, no. Right now, if you're thinking about trends in terms of these transient fashions that kind of come in and out, but when I talk about trends, I'm not talking about aesthetic things. I'm not talking about styles that might be hot at a particular period of history or another. What I'm talking about are more what you would label economic trends or social trends or other large changes that evolve over time, sometimes in unpredictable ways. Sometimes they take unpredictable turns that have a shaping influence on the environment in which we do business. So if we think about trends in that way, yes, you want to pay attention to them, but that's, trying to figure out what trends are happening and then surfing them like waves is really not what I would recommend. It's
Mm.
really it's really more about trying to use facts and observations, and information to kind of sketch out a few scenarios of what the future might look like, enough so that you can, as a sole practitioner or as the owner of a firm, that you can make changes now that are going to help you be more relevant in the future. So the word trends, we honestly could leave that one behind. Really, what it is it's about understanding how the wider context in which we run architecture and design businesses, how that's changing and how we need to adapt and how we can be proactive about that and make changes that help us have a greater impact in the future.
Is there? I I like that. I like that perspective because I think that gets us away from the danger of chasing this, that, and the other. Like you called it surfing, which I think is a great analogy for it. As small firm architects, what's the most important thing that either, like you said, either the leader of the firm or a sole practitioner, what's the most important thing that they have to keep in mind or they have to establish in order to um, in order to take this journey as we're looking at what's happening in the marketplace and with the business and stay relevant, as you said. I think that was a great statement as well.
Yeah, so it's a challenging question to answer because there's so many things that are really important. When we work with firms, what we always start out with is we always start out with values, right? Which are
Mhm.
the essential core of an organization. Is what are the values of the organization, and it shows up in the firm's culture. What are the values of the leadership team that they are going to live, and that really is at the heart of everything that comes after, right? So if there's one thing that leaders need to pay attention to, if there's a first order of business, it actually is knowing your values and communicating your values to the people around you and making your decisions about how to build and run your business based on those values. Now, there's a whole lot else that you need to pay attention to, but this is a point at which I would love to hear more from the folks who are on the call, in their experience. What is it that they feel is most important? What is it that they're most curious about when they try to think about their own future? Um, again, whether it's just their future as a sole practitioner or the future of their organizations, what is it that they're thinking about? I think that would be
That's a great question. So for everybody out there in the audience, whether you're on Facebook or LinkedIn, I see Jefferson over there on LinkedIn joining us from Boulder today instead of Los Angeles, in the midst of the daughter's wedding festivities. All right, congratulations. Wherever you're joining the conversation from, drop that in the comments from whichever platform. What's the number one thing that you pay attention to when it comes to your business, or that you're concerned with comes to your business? Drop that in the comments right now so we can see that. Chris says, one value I have implemented is no longer taking on clients who want to build to code minimum.
Yep. One of my favorite quotes from one of our speakers at a Design Futures Council event was that all the code is the worst building allowable by law.
Yeah.
Which I think is fantastic. That was a great way to sum that up. One of the things I would love to hear more about from Chris is what is it that you are looking for in clients? Like what is your ideal client? What values do you look for? What kind of values match do you look for with a client who is going to want to transcend just what the code says?
Yeah, right. That's a great question. And there, depending on who you listen to, there are a lot of experts out there that say what we're really looking for in an ideal client, if we want to use that term, is alignment. Alignment in values, alignment in beliefs, things like that. So, Chris, if you can answer Bob's question there, that would be good. And everybody else out there, what is it that you're most concerned about? John Jones says, sorry, go ahead.
Whoops. There you go. Is a recession coming? I pushed ticker instead of the upper one. That's on everybody's mind, I guess. So I'll just leave it there.
Sure.
But I don't know that you tell the future so much in that way, but is there a recession coming?
Well, the economy is cyclical, right? So in our organization, we have relationships with economists at the American Institute of Economic Research. Dave Gilmore, who is our president and CEO, did postdoctoral work at the London School of Economics. So we do have people in our organization who are much more steeped in this stuff than I am. But one of the challenges with the economy is predictions are almost always wrong, right? And predictions that are very specific, a lot of times those are closely associated with hucksters. So what you got to do is you got to when you're looking at the economy, we're in some unusual territory. I was reading an article in the Wall Street Journal the other day that talked about the last 6 recessions. And in the last 6 recessions, there's a very predictable pattern where you have the GDP going down over a period of time and unemployment going up over a period of time. They're almost in an X-like formation. What we have is a contraction in GDP right now, but plenty of jobs. It's a situation that, it's kind of leaving a lot of economists bemused, because there are companies out there that still have job openings, that are still having a hard time finding talent, and that still are doing a lot of business. But we've got these other factors that are usually associated with a recession, like contraction in GDP, and then also, we've got issues with inflation and things. So that's unique, at least relative to the last 75 years or so. How is that going to play out? I challenge anybody to give a very definitive answer. But how is it that small, mid-sized, and even large firms need to respond? Well, one of the things that's very important is to become a more resilient organization, right? To actually have plans for a downturn and say, in a downturn, what is it that we would do? And the time to deal with a downturn is as far ahead of when it's happening as possible, right? So the challenge that a lot of firms face is the best time to make changes and to create plans is when you are actually the busiest doing other things. So in general, and we can continue to unpack that if you want to. Now, what are some of the other factors? Let me go back and add a couple of other comments about the economy. The money that was earmarked by the government for COVID relief didn't immediately get released into the marketplace. And a lot of that money is actually just coming out now. Here in Atlanta, where I'm based, we actually have funds from the bipartisan infrastructure bill that are funding a whole lot of headaches and inconvenience for drivers on the Beltline around our city, which is 285.
Yeah, but that's a normal Atlanta Thursday.
Well, it's made all the more special by infrastructure work. But the point is that you've got a lot of money that's being injected into the system that is having a buoying effect, in some sectors. So it's very difficult to say with certainty, what's going to happen in the next 12 months or so. I don't think that we're going to see a large downturn before the end of the year. I think we will see persistent inflation, certainly higher than 5% by toward the end of the year. But in terms of a recession as the way that we're used to seeing it, insofar as it makes sense to make a prediction, I think we're probably looking out into 2023 before that kind of thing would happen. Now, how is that relevant? Now is the time to make sure that you're prepared, right? So as a practitioner, as a small firm owner, understanding, put your plan together and put your plan in action now. Now is the time. Actually, last year was the time, but failing that, today will do.
Yeah, the time to plant the tree, right?
Yeah.
Analogy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Jeff, I'm sure you see this in marketing all the time. The time to focus on marketing and business development is not when you need work, right? Because they're good, because there's a cycle, right? There's a time between your actions and when you see, some benefit from those.
Yeah. That's why I really like the term pipeline, right? Because it can be very visual for people in this profession. You've got a pipe, right? And something goes in one end and most of it comes out the other end, but it takes some time. So, you have to prepare. And if you need something to come out of that pipe today, you should have put, depending on how long the pipe is, of course, and other factors. If you needed something to come out today, you should have put it in probably quite some time ago. So that's good advice. Start preparing.
Well, one of the most helpful concrete actions that leaders can start to take is to learn about your client's industry, right? And if you're a residential architect, that means what's going on in the housing sector in the areas where you are, because all real estate is local, right? And so let's say, for instance, we talked to somebody in the call this morning who had a very tight specialization around gas stations and kind of.
It was Nicole.
Right. So Nicole had a very focused business, and she talked about the ways in which she kept up on what's going on in the industry that her clients live in. That's one of the smartest things you can do, is really understand your client's world and their business world from their standpoint. Now, what that allows you to do is, if you understand that, is you can frame what it is that you do and how you create value in what's important to them. It's like speaking the same language as your clients, right? Really being able to understand what their perspective is. So understanding the challenges that they're facing, we can think what we want about the economy, but what are your clients thinking about the economy, right? And that can vary from sector to sector.
I think that's a really great point, because the impact, the reaction is going to come from your clients, your potential clients. So understanding what their reaction is, what the impact of it is, I think is really important. What and this is, I know this is, even as it's coming out of my head and out of my mouth, I know this is a really hard question, because we could be talking about Nicole's segment with fuel stations, we could be talking about residential, we could be talking about hospitality or whatever. But what do you have any tips for the best way to do that research, for the best way to understand what's going on in your marketplace with your ideal clients?
Well, some of it will happen naturally over time if you're open and observant, right, in your interactions with clients. The more that you're working with folks in a given, in a given industry, right, you're going to come to understand their world just by being exposed to it.
Right.
One of the, if I were to come up with kind of some cheats, like for the for folks who have precious little time to dedicate to this, begin by knowing, being involved with, and being engaged with the content and the groups that your clients are a part of, right? Industry organizations that clients belong to. A lot of them have publications or are producing content that is geared toward your clients, right? So let's say, for instance, that you have a lot of work in independent schools, right? So that's a niche. So independent K-12 schools. Well, one of the smartest things you can do is understand the role of fundraising within the independent school world, because that's going to be foremost on the mind of the folks who are, whether it's the board of that organization, or whether it's the senior management of that organization. That's an important part of their world, and it has a direct relationship on when they want to do capital projects. Right? Go ahead.
That reminds me of a conversation with Patrick McLamey, who is the former CEO. He retired as CEO of HOK. He'd been there 50 years, and he tells a story of really, I guess, when HOK came to real prominence in the sports architecture market. And I don't remember the names anymore, but he talked about someone at HOK that was, in this sports architecture department, had a relationship, and I forget now if it was the NFL or Major League Baseball, but they had a relationship with somebody that got them into the owners' meetings. And they couldn't participate in the meetings. Obviously, they weren't an owner of one of these franchises, but they could be the fly on the wall. And by sitting in on these owners' meetings, they got to understand, let's just say it was the NFL, not football, right? That wasn't what they were understanding, but they were understanding the business of football and what these owners really cared about in terms of revenue, in terms of fan experience and what that meant to revenue, and all of these other things. And as someone who worked at HNTB at the time, who was going head to head with HOK at the time on all these sports architecture projects, when HOK started kicking our butt on these projects, is about that time, is when they started understanding that market better than anybody else did, and understanding the needs of those owners better than anybody else did. Great, good for them. They had that relationship that got them in the room, but that was really where that came from. And I really appreciate that story as Patrick told it, because I think that's got great lessons, and I think it's really a parallel to what you're saying.
Yeah, no, I would agree. That's a fantastic story, and it reminds me of the one experience I had being on the client side of a built environment project. So many moons ago, I was the director of communications at an independent school that was, over 100 years old. And it hadn't done anything significant with its campus since the early 1960s. And I was in charge of the communications effort around building the strategy, developing the campus master plan, and then doing the capital campaign to help raise funds for this. Now, it was one independent school, but it was overall in a 10-year period, they were projecting a $70 million improvement to the campus. So over time, it was quite an investment that they were looking to make. The architecture firm that we were working with did a fantastic job at helping the people who ran the school, who were not, they hadn't done a major capital project in decades, right? So they were not very savvy clients, but the firm helped them really understand what their needs were and where they should be putting their investments, right, in terms of what kind of facilities they needed. So that firm, of course, was let's just say the odds-on favorite to wind up getting the design work, and they did. Then things kind of got interesting, because what I don't feel that they really understood was that once we started getting into how the strategy for the school shows up in a new campus, that we then have to go out and raise 60 to 70% of that $70 million in order to be able to do a single building. And I ultimately had to go into my budget. Now, remember, I'm on the client side. In order to have even like a 3D model built of the new campus, because I just couldn't get files out of the architecture firm, no matter how many times we asked or how many influential people I tried to get to ask on my behalf. And it just baffled me that they didn't understand. We needed to tell a story of the vision of the future of the campus. Why wasn't our architect leading the development of that story and helping guide us in how we could tell that story, frame that story in a compelling way for people to help support what this vision for the future of the school was? To me, that was a real light bulb moment, and it was a lesson that I've taken into my work today, because it was after that I started, working with architecture and design firms on how it is that they can run better businesses. So I always took that lesson with me as an example of, there are tremendous opportunities for architects to get back into the master builder model, right? And to be the true client advocate and leader. I think there are ways in which there are some sort of self-limiting practices and self-limiting beliefs that have come about to sort of diminish the influence that architects have. But there's so much opportunity. There's so much opportunity to create value in ways that we're not doing it today. That I'm excited when I'm seeing people be creative about how they create value and how they help folks, and then start realizing the benefits of that.
Yeah, Matthew said one of his main concerns is the rapidly shrinking role of the architect, especially the design role, but really everything. And he uses the hashtag master builder there. So that's right along with what you're talking about. That's something we talk about quite often, understandably, is how can architects communicate the value? How can architects maybe increase the value of what they're providing? I don't know how much that fits into the conversation about trends and well, certainly response to trends, I guess.
Well, let's zoom out for a minute and talk about how that fits. In the story I was telling, in the seat where I was sitting,
Right.
I had a need for someone to help me tell the story of a vision, right? A bold vision that was a bold vision for a campus that was based on a strategy, that the school had developed for how it wanted to evolve. And that, it was our burden to create, it's not incumbent on the world to pay for our project. We had to convince people that this was a cause worth supporting. And in order to do that, what we needed to do was we needed to go to those people who were donors, and we needed to tell the story in a way that touched on what was important to them, right? So it was on us to really understand what was important to them and to communicate to them what was important to us and how those things overlapped. So, when you think about, people talk a lot about the diminishing role of the architect, and I don't think that that's an across the board situation, right? Because especially in the last 5 years, I've seen a lot of really interesting innovation in not just architecture, but engineering firms as well, expanding into other areas, other ways to create value that they hadn't before, that actually provided not only more revenue streams, but also a lot more influence. I think that one of the factors that can influence this is how you create value, and value is defined by what's important to the client, right?
Right.
And it's important to accept that the world doesn't always understand what kind of value an architect can create, as tremendous as that value is. And it's just it's just a fact that it's on us to explain, and it's on us to educate folks as to what the value is that we can create. So there's that factor to it. Another has to do with risk, right? And how is it that we deal with risk in our businesses? I think you can trace a lot of the beginning of the diminishment of the role of architects to that era in history when contracts started to shed risk, right? And put it onto other parties, because there's a connection from a business standpoint between the willingness to accept and mitigate risk and what the potential reward is, right? If someone's not willing to take on the risk of a project or share the risk of a project, think about it from the owner's standpoint, who's paying for the project. Why in the world would I pay you more if anything goes wrong and you're the first thing that you're saying in this contract is, well, that's not our thing. We're not liable for that. We're not getting into that. So how it is that we structure our agreements with clients is another factor. So there are places where we can actually take action and make change to increase the role of architects. A third way is pricing. So a lot of over the years we've trained the market in many cases to think of our fee as a percentage of a construction budget, right? And that's very limiting, and it really doesn't reflect the value that's created. One thing I've seen in firms for years and years and years and years is that a lot of the value that they create is in the pre-design phase, right? But most firms still use that as a loss leader to get the design work, right? And in firms that are still operating in a very traditional way, a lot of the fee is based around construction documentation and, developing a lot of that. And, technology is cutting the heart out of that. So we've got this really weird business model where the value created is on the front end and the expectation for revenue is on the back end. And that's backwards. And if we don't re-educate clients about what the value is and where it comes from, it's going to be it's a very hard model to sustain. Now, the good news is that I'm seeing a shift away from that. I've seen a shift away from that, especially in the last 5 years. That's very positive. And so I think that there are a lot of folks and a lot of firms out there that are helping change that. But if that story sounds familiar to anybody who's on this call, you might want to take a second look at how you're framing what you're doing and what you're charging for, and start to make those changes now so that you're reclaiming the value that you're genuinely creating.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That to me is one of the great mysteries of the profession, is with all the value creation on the front end and the back end essentially being commoditized, right? We can have documents produced in a myriad of ways in a myriad of locations for almost nothing, but then to flip the pricing and invoicing model upside down, if you will, that's an oddity of our business model here. Speaking of risk or lack thereof, Christian wants to know what you think about NFTs and the metaverse.
Well, so Christian, it's I have a few thoughts about NFTs and the metaverse and things like that. We're very much in a Wild West period. If you're looking at cryptocurrencies in general, right, which I would group NFTs in the same general bucket of cryptocurrencies, what you had this novel idea of essentially a supranational medium of exchange, and people launched the technology, and by and large it was like, well, let's see what happens. So I don't think that there was a whole lot of planning that went into how cryptocurrencies would be used and things like that. I think one of the most interesting stories with cryptocurrency is the underlying technology that is there, whether it's blockchain or related technologies, and what those could potentially mean to contracts, and what that means to ownership, right, and documentation of ownership, and what it could mean to the way that we structure business agreements. There's a lot of second and third order effects that would be really interesting to look at. As far as the metaverse goes, that's another one that's evolving. And I read a story, I can't remember whether it was in Design or which of the design publications it was in, but it was talking about a project that Bjarke Ingels Group, that Big had done, designing a virtual headquarters for a for a company that was setting up a virtual presence in one of the metaverse platforms. And I thought, okay, I understand how that's cool. But I thought, gosh, is that a failure of imagination? We've got this strange new technology and this strange new world that we as physical human beings are going to be participating in. And trying to take what we do in the physical world as architects and simply transfer that over without any change in concept into the metaverse, it's like, that seems a little bit like an obvious direction to go. What would happen if we backed out from that, or if we backed away from that and said, how is it that that architects can create value in the metaverse and didn't limit ourselves to what the physical product is that we work on in the physical world, what might that look like? How can that, how creative can we be there? And is there real opportunity? Now, I don't know the answer to that question, but I would love to have that be the level of the conversation instead of, how can we design cool looking virtual buildings that exist only in the metaverse?
So to me, one of the great value propositions of the architect is the ability to shape experience. And I think often we fail at that. We're paying attention only to aesthetics or value engineering, et cetera. And I completely understand the realities of it, but I think that's a real superpower of the architect is the ability to shape experience, whether it's in the building, adjacent to the building, whatever the context is. I think you can carry that into the metaverse as we've had a couple of metaverse architects as guests on Context and Clarity Live in the past, and fascinating conversations. We'll get to Christian's follow-up question here in a second, but I still think, right, one of the immediate things is, okay, well, there's no gravity, so why are we, what are we doing? But I think to me it still comes to the experience, and I think that the problem then becomes, right, if you are afraid of the competition from draftspeople and unlicensed professionals in the real world, in the physical world, as your competitors competing against architects in the physical world, then I think you get into user experience, right? The more digital creatives as the competitors in the metaverse, and I think you run up directly against that. But that's I have a limited knowledge on these. We've researched a lot as we've had these types of guests, but to me, that's where the real value proposition carries over, is the ability to create a unique and wonderful, or however you want to describe it, experience in the metaverse, as a professional designer, I guess.
Well, your framing is really interesting, Jeff. So, I kind of put it out there to say, well, what if we backed up and said, we thought about something like the metaverse, and we said, well, how is it that we can create value there? And you said, well, one of the ways that we create value is in shaping experiences. So simply asking the question, how do we shape experiences in the metaverse?
Yeah.
By affecting the what it is that somebody what the environment is that somebody's in there, or I don't even want to limit it to that.
Mm-hmm.
That then says, okay, well, if we zoom back out into the real world, what happens to our business and our practice if we are just as creative and just as free in our thinking about how we're going to create value for people, in the 3D physical world, right? One of the things that I think is so impressive about architects and others and designers and others, especially related to the built environment, is that there's such complexity in what architects do. And architects are able to master that complexity to design and deliver these amazing buildings and spaces and environments. When I work with architects and engineers and others on their businesses, it's as though they've forgotten that they have this amazing superpower. And we'll be working on developing the strategy for a firm, and its vision for the future and how it's going to navigate itself to get there. And I'm thinking, yes, you weren't trained formally in a business domain, but you've been running a good practice and a good firm for quite a while. And this is not, it's not as complex as what you do every single day. It's just a question of transferring what you can do from one domain to another. I have a colleague named Scott Simpson who he was kind of a serial CEO in architecture and engineering firms. And one of the things that he always talks about business problems as being just another type of design problem. And when we can help people connect with that, it opens up a tremendous number of doors. One of the ways that it does that is that people all of a sudden realize I can leverage the unique way I can think as an architect to solve business problems, right? And then the other is that it tends to help people see through kind of a cultural resistance that I think might be in the professions around the business side of what we do. You know what word I never ever use with a client? Sales.
With architect clients?
I don't use that word, because what happens is you just lose people. They just shut off.
Right.
Because they have this conception of, the hard charging aluminum siding salesman, or, they've got to be P.T. Barnum or something. Now, anyone who was, doing an analysis of professional services, the model for professional services, especially architecture, would say it's a sales-driven model, right? Because traditionally speaking, it's, you would have the owner of a firm, the head of a studio, who's basically out there developing business and, first of all, finding leads, developing those leads, developing relationships, and generally, bringing work into the firm by effort of themselves as an individual, often in connecting with other individuals in the world. Well, that's a sales-driven model, right? So it's interesting. So you have the traditional model of how work comes into a firm is very sales-driven, but you have this cultural resistance to the idea of sales. And so ultimately what happens is that you wind up having this, you wind up having this kind of resistance that is very damaging, can be limiting. I won't say damaging. It can be damaging, but limiting. There's one of the multinationals. I was, having coffee with the head of their London office, and he said something I will never forget. He said, a lot of our practitioners, especially the younger ones, look at business development as some sort of dark art. I was like, gosh, where are you going to go with that? Anyway, I don't want to get on a soapbox and get into finger wagging or anything. That's not my intention. But there are ways that I do see, folks in the profession just really unfortunately limiting themselves by not applying their talents and imagination to problems outside of their realm, right? And by holding on to some things that we might have picked up in design school that aren't particularly helpful.
That's a nice way to put that. I don't want to miss out on Christian's follow-up question here. So he says, are NFTs and the metaverse a trend or a fad? And will they be a thing 10 or 20 years from now? This is where the predictions come in, apparently.
Well, again, it's like, what do you look at that and where is it that we have enough information to be able to make some kind of projection or even a scenario? One of the things to look at is not necessarily cryptocurrencies or NFTs, but the underlying technology, and ask ourselves, what else can that technology do that we're not envisioning today? There are many answers to that, many potential answers to that question. And if you think about how can that technology create value, and start to think about those questions, there are other people working on those questions. That indicates to me that at least the underlying technology has at least the underlying technology is likely to, if not grow into something else that we aren't seeing yet, it will be a stepping stone to another technology that, and it'll be an important stepping stone to another technology. So I would say there's some indicators. I would say that the underlying technology will be there. As far as, mediums of exchange on that technology, I don't have any idea what will happen to NFTs. One of the things I can tell you about those folks who have been very successful with NFTs. So if anybody's familiar with this world, people usually have kind of a nom de plume, right? So there's one artist named Beeple, and he was the first person to sell an NFT, I think, for whatever it was, through Christie, $64 million. That's since actually been surpassed. And if you look, like there's another quite young, successful artist who goes by the name of Ferocious. And what these artists are doing is that they aren't simply creating a virtual product and then selling it. It isn't like you create something that's just a JPEG or just a digital model or whatever, and then you wind up selling that. There's a lot of innovation happening in what the higher level creators are doing, trying to figure out how a virtual experience crosses back over into the physical world. We're getting off on a bit of a tangent, but I'm just responding to this question. Here's what I see happening with NFTs. I think that the artists who are involved with creating them are experimenting with new ways to blend what goes on in a virtual space with what goes on in a physical space, and to create you can't even call it a multimedia product. It's really a multi-universe product offering. So it's really interesting to watch, simply to see how is it that leading creators are innovating, and what is it that what is it that bands are doing with NFTs, and how are they using a combination of NFT and live performances and real experiences? How are they creating offerings that straddle the world, straddle these two different worlds? This is a very grandiose statement, but it's a unique period of history. People who are creators have never before had the opportunity to create in this way, in both a virtual and a physical environment, and try to create experiences that move between those two worlds. So it's a really interesting creative challenge. I have no idea where that's going to go. But what I do is I do watch the people who are deep in that space and how they're innovating. And then I also watch what the institutions are doing. If you look at the Wall Street folks, they all have crypto desks. Christie's, the auction house, is where, Beeple and Ferocious are both represented by Christie's. So institutions are trying to figure out how they play in this space too. That's an indicator to me that something, people aren't going to just turn off the metaverse and look the other way. It may not become what we think it will, but but it's got a toehold.
Yeah. We, I guess early in the year, well, I mean, we're mid-year now, but early in the year, we had a lot of conversations, and we've got a couple coming up on more technology, but conversations about metaverse and NFTs and AI and others, and um, yet to be seen, right? It's a lot of people have compared it to the early days of the internet, and
Yeah.
what's going to become of this thing. So
Well, so a lot of when we talk about things that are very theoretical like this, it's
yeah,
fun to talk about ideas. But unless you bring the highfalutin down to day to day,
right.
it can be of limited relevance, especially when you've got pressing other stuff going on in your practice and in your firm. So, what's useful? What's useful to what could be useful to folks on this call, even considering these kind of questions? I think that there may be some lessons in how to think creatively about creating value, right? What is it that leading creators are doing in this particular space to evolve their work from simply, we're going to sell a high priced JPEG, on down to, well, that's no longer enough because there's too much competition. And now what we're going to do, or, people are not quite still seeing the value. So we have to stay ahead of that. And we have to think about other ways that we can creatively build an offering, that is in this space. Some very, there are quite a few firms that tend to be mid to large size firms that are starting to get into the business of helping their clients make real estate decisions, right? So they are actually starting to compete with, the owners reps of the world and the real estate consultancies of the world. But they can also bring that on down, all the way on down to ground level, right? Which is, how does a client get the most out of a real estate holding that they have? That's a wonderful example of, I guess the businessy term would be sort of swimming upstream. How firms can develop influence and trust on a whole different level with a client, and how they can create value far upstream that they realize, like they're being paid for this value, but then also they can help the client through much more of that journey on down to, from portfolio all the way to individual property, right? And how is it that through expertise in creating experiences and things like that, that they can, maximize what a client is going to get out of a particular property, right? So again, it's all about being alive to opportunities and being observant and following the classic entrepreneur model, right? The classic entrepreneur model is seeing a gap in the market and coming up with a creative and novel way to fill that gap. When you keep it that undefined, it allows for a lot of creativity in how that problem is solved. So even if you're like a residential architect, as an example, if you sit down and you think, okay, what residential architects do is amazing, and it has a tremendous shaping effect on the lives of people, right? They're creating homes. The way that people are working and living is changing. It stands to reason that there are gaps out there that need to be creatively filled, that help folks adapt to the changing world of life and work. Now, if you think about it on that level, and you're a residential architect, it's like, okay, well, what do I see? Is there a way that I can create something valuable that serves that gap, that closes that gap up, that helps people in a new way?
Maybe as a way to bring this all back around and tie a bow on the conversation, Chad just asked a question: where do you see the small firm trend going? What is the gap, maybe, for small firms in the marketplace? Or is that even the right question, right? Or should it be small firms
It's going to
looking for the
be,
gap?
well, everybody should be looking for ways in which people, we serve our clients, we help our clients, we're making some positive change in the life of our clients, right? Whether it's in the business of our clients, on the commercial side, to the lived experience of our clients when they're in homes, right? When they're at home. We are always doing our work to try to create some kind of positive change in the life of someone. So when we think very broadly about it, we think, okay, how are there ways in which, where are there gaps, right? Where are there places where the people who we serve and help are not being served and helped? That's the place to start. And then from there, simply being observant, and the more that you understand about the world of your client, the more you're going to start to understand where they feel gaps. Right now, one of the questions I'd love to unpack with a bunch of residential architects is, how is it that residential architecture is changing based on changing working models? We were plunged into that, at the beginning of COVID. And it's interesting because it's going to, it seems to be an enduring trend, is the idea that there used to be much more of a separation between home and work. And now that is becoming much more integrated. And how does that need to show up in the way that we shape buildings where people live?
Yeah.
And more than just clever ways to turn the third bedroom into an office.
Right. Yeah. And ultimately it comes down to, it comes down to the experience, the end user, and creating value, providing value for that particular user. And like you said, that's, I don't remember exactly how you said it, but it's in the eye of the beholder, right? They get to determine that definition.
Well, and I use the terms creating value and stuff like that, and that sounds very businessy, but really it's about how are you improving other people's lives,
right?
And in a way that they value, in a way that they think is worth paying you. And it really is about improving lives.
Exactly. Well, Bob, thank you for this journey today. We've gone to the metaverse and back. We've traded NFTs and cryptocurrencies, and looked at a lot of different ways to think about what's going on in the marketplace and in the business. So thank you for this conversation today. Really appreciate it. And to all of you out there in our audience, thank you for your comments and your questions. Thanks for participating in this thing that we call Context and Clarity Live. We do this every day. We do Context and Clarity Conversations every day. Context and Clarity Live is every Thursday afternoon. We'll be back on Clubhouse tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Eastern, asking the question, what's at the intersection of art, music, and architecture? I think we can have a really fun conversation with that. And then tomorrow afternoon, we'll be back inside the Entre Architect Community Facebook group with the same question, what's at the intersection of art, music, and architecture? As we look...
Oh, I thought tomorrow was a book club. I finished the book in time for tomorrow, but it's not. It's next week.
It's not. It's next week.
Oh.
Hey, congratulations. See, that was a bait and switch.
I finished it early. Sorry to interrupt, but
No,
had to.
that's a good reminder. Next Friday will be our Context and Clarity Book Club discussion of Start With Why by Simon Sinek. So you've got 8 or 9 days to finish that book if you haven't already. So join us for that. Next week for Context and Clarity Live, our scheduled guest is Jessica Pan, the author of Sorry I'm Late, I Didn't Want to Come.
Which she may tell us again.
she may not want to come. I don't know. But we'll talk with Jessica next Thursday. That book, Sorry I'm Late, was our which month was it? April or May?
Might have been May.
That was our May Context and Clarity Book Club book. So
Mhm.
we'll actually hopefully get the author on Context and Clarity Live next week. So with that, again, thanks everybody. Appreciate every single one of you for being here and asking your questions, participating in this conversation. My encouragement to you is to take a little bit of time to breathe, relax, find a way to rejuvenate. We do this every day. It's a long game. Thanks for playing it with us. Thanks for hanging in there. Be well, stay safe, keep those that matter the most to you safe and well. And we'll see you again tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.